Marcus Williams sat hunched over his desk in the small administration office at Fort Braxton, his fingers dancing across the keyboard as he processed yet another stack of personnel files. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a pale glow across the cramped room filled with filing cabinets and outdated computers. Outside, he could hear the thunderous voices of drill sergeants barking orders at new recruits. At 24, Marcus had been working as a civilian clerk at the military base for 3 years. His thin frame and quiet demeanor made him nearly invisible among the towering soldiers who passed through his office daily. He wore simple khakis and button-down shirts, a stark contrast to the crisp uniform surrounding him. His job was straightforward but important, maintaining personnel records, processing transfer orders, and ensuring every piece of paperwork was filed correctly. Marcus had always been good with details. In high school, while other kids played sports or joined social clubs, he spent his time organizing his room, color-coding his notes, and helping teachers manage their gradebooks. His parents, both accountants, had raised him to appreciate the value of precision and order. When the position at Fort Braxton opened up after his college graduation, it seemed like a perfect fit. The base was a world unto itself, with its own culture, hierarchy, and unspoken rules. Marcus quickly learned to keep his head down and focus on his work. The soldiers were generally polite to him, though he often felt like he was looking through glass at a life he could never understand. They spoke in military jargon, shared stories of training exercises and deployments, and carried themselves with a confidence that Marcus envied. Sergeant First Class Rodriguez was different from the others. Standing at 6 feet 4 inches with broad shoulders and arms like tree trunks, Rodriguez commanded attention wherever he went. His voice could be heard across the entire administrative building when he wanted something done. He had been a drill sergeant for 8 years and took pride in transforming soft civilians into hardened soldiers. Rodriguez first noticed Marcus during a busy Monday morning when the clerk was processing a large batch of new recruit files. The sergeant had walked into the office, his boots clicking authoritatively on the linoleum floor, demanding immediate access to a particular trainee's medical records. "I need Private Johnson's file, and I need it now," Rodriguez had growled, leaning over Marcus's desk with an intimidating presence. Marcus, startled by the sudden intrusion, fumbled through his carefully organized filing system. His hands shook slightly as he searched for the correct folder. "It should be right here, Sergeant Rodriguez. Let me just what? Take all day?" Rodriguez's voice dripped with impatience. "In the real army, we don't have time for this kind of fumbling around." The comment stung, but Marcus continued searching until he found the file. As he handed it over, Rodriguez shook his head and muttered something about desk jockeys before striding out of the office. This interaction set the tone for their relationship. Over the following months, Rodriguez seemed to take particular pleasure in making Marcus uncomfortable. Whenever he needed something from the administrative office, he would make pointed comments about the soft civilian who couldn't handle real military pressure. "Look at this guy," Rodriguez would say to other soldiers when they came to pick up paperwork. "Probably never done a push-up in his life. Wouldn't last 5 minutes in basic training." The other soldiers would chuckle, not necessarily agreeing but not wanting to contradict their superior. Marcus tried to ignore the comments, but they accumulated like small cuts. He began dreading the sound of Rodriguez's boots in the hallway, knowing another humiliating encounter was coming. The sergeant seemed to have an endless supply of creative insults, always delivered with a smile that made them feel even more degrading. "Hey, paper pusher," Rodriguez would call out when he entered the office. "Try not to break a sweat moving those files around." Or, "I bet you think alphabetizing is a real workout, don't you?" The worst part wasn't the insults themselves, but the way they made Marcus question his own worth. He began to wonder if Rodriguez was right, if he really was just a weak civilian who didn't deserve to be working among real soldiers. His confidence, never very strong to begin with, began to crumble under the constant mockery. Marcus's co-workers in the administrative building were sympathetic, but offered little help. "Just ignore him," they would say. "Rodriguez is like that with everyone." But Marcus knew this wasn't true. The sergeant reserved his harshest treatment specifically for him, as if he had somehow personally offended the man by simply existing. The situation reached a breaking point on a particularly busy Thursday afternoon. Marcus was working late, trying to finish processing a large batch of transfer orders that needed to be completed by the end of the week. The office was nearly empty, with only the sound of his keyboard clicking and the distant echo of evening training exercises. Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, looking even more imposing in the dim lighting. "Still here, paperboy? What's taking you so long? A real soldier would have finished this hours ago." Marcus looked up from his screen, feeling 3 years of accumulated frustration rising in his chest. For just a moment he considered responding, saying something to defend himself, but as he met Rodriguez's cold stare, his courage evaporated like morning dew. "I'm sorry, Sergeant. I'll work faster," he said quietly, turning back to his computer. Rodriguez stepped into the office, his presence filling the small space. "You know what your problem is? You're exactly what's wrong with this generation. No backbone, no discipline, no real strength. You hide behind that desk because you know you could never cut it in the real world." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. He felt his face flush with embarrassment and anger, but he kept his eyes on his screen, refusing to give Rodriguez the satisfaction of seeing how much the comments hurt. "I've seen thousands of recruits come through here," Rodriguez continued, warming to his theme. "Some make it, some don't, but at least they try. You're not even worth the effort it would take to train you." As Rodriguez finally left the office, Marcus sat alone in the gathering darkness, wondering how much longer he could endure this treatment. He had no idea that everything was about to change, or that a chance encounter the very next day would set in motion events that would transform both his life and Rodriguez's understanding of what it truly means to be strong. The next morning brought an unusual buzz of activity to Fort Braxton. Word had spread quickly through the administrative building that General Patricia Hayes would be conducting a surprise inspection of the base. Marcus had heard the name whispered with a mixture of respect and fear. General Hayes was a legend in military circles, known for her sharp intellect, unwavering standards, and ability to see through any facade. Marcus arrived at his office earlier than usual, wanting to ensure everything was perfectly organized before the inspection. He straightened his already neat desk, double-checked his filing system, and made sure every document was exactly where it should be. He had learned long ago that preparation was his strongest asset, and today he wanted everything to be flawless. General Hayes was 53 years old and had earned her rank through a combination of brilliant strategic thinking and an uncanny ability to read people. She had served in 3 combat zones, commanded 2 different bases, and had a reputation for discovering potential in the most unlikely places. Her inspection style was unconventional. Instead of the formal parade reviews that most generals preferred, she liked to walk around unannounced, observing how people behaved when they thought no one important was watching. Around 10 o'clock, Marcus was deeply focused on updating a complex database when he heard unfamiliar footsteps in the hallway. These weren't the heavy, authoritative steps of Rodriguez or the other drill sergeants. They were measured, deliberate, and somehow commanded attention without demanding it. General Hayes appeared in the doorway of the administrative office, wearing a crisp uniform adorned with ribbons that told the story of a distinguished career. She was of average height but carried herself with a presence that seemed to fill the room. Her gray hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her dark eyes missed nothing as they swept across the office. "Good morning," she said simply, stepping into the room. "I'm General Hayes. I don't believe we've met." Marcus immediately stood up, his chair rolling backward as he snapped to attention. He had never been in the presence of such a high-ranking officer, and he felt his palms begin to sweat. "Good morning, General. I'm Marcus Williams, civilian clerk. It's an honor to meet you, ma'am." General Hayes studied him for a moment, taking in his nervous but respectful demeanor, his meticulously organized workspace, and the stack of perfectly processed files on his desk. "At ease, Marcus. May I take a look at your operation here?" For the next 20 minutes, General Hayes asked Marcus detailed questions about his work. She wanted to know about his filing system, his process for handling urgent requests, and how he managed to keep track of thousands of personnel records. Marcus, gradually relaxing under her genuine interest, explained his methods with growing confidence. "I've developed a cross-referencing system that allows me to locate any file within 30 seconds, he explained, demonstrating on his computer. "I also maintain backup copies of all critical documents and have implemented a color coding system for different types of requests." General Hayes nodded approvingly. "Impressive. How long have you been working here?" 3 years, ma'am. I started right after college. And in those 3 years, have you ever made a significant error with personnel files? Marcus thought carefully. No, ma'am, not a significant one. I've caught a few minor discrepancies in incoming paperwork and corrected them before they became problems. Excellent attention to detail, General Hayes observed. She noticed the way Marcus's workspace was arranged. Everything had a purpose and a place, and she could see the care he took in his work. Tell me, what do you think is the most important aspect of military administration? The question caught Marcus off guard. He had expected to answer technical questions about filing procedures, not to discuss military philosophy with a general. I think it's understanding that every piece of paper represents a real person. When I process a transfer order, that's someone's life changing. When I update a service record, that's someone's career I'm documenting. The details matter because people matter. General Hayes smiled for the first time since entering the office. This young civilian understood something that many career soldiers missed: the human element behind all the bureaucracy. Their conversation was interrupted by the loud voice of Sergeant Rodriguez, echoing down the hallway. Where is that lazy clerk? I need those training reports processed immediately. General Hayes raised an eyebrow but said nothing as Rodriguez appeared in the doorway. The drill sergeant's face went pale when he saw the general standing in the office, and he immediately snapped to attention. General Hayes, I wasn't aware you were inspecting this section, ma'am. At ease, Sergeant. I was just having an interesting conversation with Mr. Williams about military administration. General Hayes's voice was neutral, but Marcus detected something underneath the surface. Rodriguez glanced at Marcus with barely concealed irritation. Yes, ma'am. Williams here handles our paperwork. He's adequate for civilian work. The dismissive tone wasn't lost on General Hayes. She had been watching Rodriguez's body language since he entered the room, noting the way he seemed to look down on the young clerk. Adequate? That's interesting. From what I've seen, Mr. Williams runs one of the most efficient administrative operations I've encountered. Rodriguez forced a smile. Of course, ma'am. I just meant that civilian work is different from real military service. I see. General Hayes turned back to Marcus. Mr. Williams, what would you say is the biggest challenge you face in your position here? Marcus hesitated, acutely aware of Rodriguez's presence behind him. He could feel the sergeant's eyes boring into the back of his head, warning him to be careful with his words. Just the usual challenges of keeping up with the workload, ma'am. General Hayes sensed there was more to the story, but she didn't press. Instead, she made a mental note to look deeper into the dynamics of this office. Well, I want to thank you for the tour of your operation. It's clear you take pride in your work. As General Hayes prepared to leave, she turned back to Rodriguez. Sergeant, I'd like to speak with you about your training methods. My office, 1 hour. Rodriguez's confident demeanor cracked slightly. Yes, ma'am. May I ask what specific aspect of training you'd like to discuss? Leadership, General Hayes replied simply. And something in her tone made both men understand that this was not going to be a routine conversation. After the general left, Rodriguez turned to Marcus with a look that could have melted steel. I don't know what you said to her, but if you think having some high-ranking officer pat you on the head changes anything, you're mistaken. Marcus said nothing, but for the first time in months, he felt something other than dread when facing Rodriguez. General Hayes had seen value in his work, had treated him with respect, and had seemed genuinely interested in what he had to say. It was a small crack in the wall of self-doubt that Rodriguez had helped build around him. As Rodriguez stormed out of the office, Marcus returned to his work with a strange new feeling stirring in his chest. He didn't know what General Hayes had planned, but he had the distinct impression that his quiet, ordered world was about to become much more complicated. General Hayes's office was located in the main command building, an imposing structure that housed the most senior officers on the base. The office itself reflected her personality, functional but not austere, with military maps on the walls alongside photographs from her various deployments. Rodriguez sat rigidly in the chair across from her desk, trying to project confidence while internally wondering what this meeting was really about. Sergeant Rodriguez, General Hayes began, settling into her chair with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to difficult conversations. I've been reviewing your training records and performance evaluations. You have an impressive track record of turning recruits into soldiers. Rodriguez relaxed slightly. Thank you, ma'am. I take pride in maintaining the highest standards. I'm sure you do. Tell me about your leadership philosophy. The question seemed straightforward enough. Rodriguez straightened in his chair. I believe in discipline, ma'am. These kids come in soft from civilian life, and it's my job to break them down and build them back up as soldiers. No coddling, no excuses. Only the strong survive. General Hayes nodded thoughtfully. And what about those who don't fit the traditional mold? The quiet ones, the thinkers, the ones who might not look like soldiers at first glance? Rodriguez's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. With respect, ma'am, this is the military. We can't lower our standards to accommodate everyone. Some people just aren't cut out for military service. Interesting perspective. General Hayes leaned back in her chair, studying the drill sergeant with the same intensity she might use to analyze a strategic situation. During my time in Afghanistan, I had an intelligence analyst who looked like he couldn't hurt a fly. Skinny kid, thick glasses, spoke so quietly you had to lean in to hear him. My field sergeants thought he was dead weight. Rodriguez listened politely, not sure where this story was heading. That analyst, General Hayes continued, identified a pattern in enemy communications that saved 47 lives during a major offensive. He worked 18-hour days for 3 weeks straight, living on coffee and determination. Never complained, never asked for recognition. Just did his job with a precision that would put a Swiss watchmaker to shame. The general paused, allowing her words to sink in. The sergeants who had written him off learned something important that day. Strength comes in many forms, and leadership means recognizing potential wherever it exists. Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He could sense where this conversation was leading, and he didn't like it. That brings me to why I asked you here, General Hayes said, her tone becoming more direct. I observed an interesting dynamic in the administrative office this morning. The civilian clerk, Marcus Williams, appears to be exceptionally competent at his job. Yet I sensed some tension in the room when you arrived. Ma'am, I wouldn't call it tension. Williams does his job adequately for a civilian. I just maintain appropriate military standards. General Hayes's eyes narrowed slightly. Sergeant, I've been in the military for 28 years. I can read a room. What I observed wasn't appropriate military standards. It was condescension bordering on bullying. Rodriguez's face flushed red. Ma'am, I would never... Let me finish. The general's voice carried the quiet authority that had commanded respect in combat zones across 3 continents. I've seen too many good people driven away from military service because someone in authority decided they didn't look the part. It's wasteful, it's counterproductive, and it goes against everything the military should stand for. The office fell silent except for the soft ticking of the wall clock. Rodriguez stared at a point somewhere above the general's head, his jaw working as he processed the criticism. General Hayes stood up and walked to the window overlooking the training grounds. Below, she could see groups of recruits running through their morning exercises, their voices carrying faintly through the glass. I want to propose something to you, Sergeant. A challenge, if you will. Rodriguez looked up sharply. Ma'am, I want you to train Marcus Williams. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Rodriguez's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. I'm sorry, ma'am, did you say train the civilian clerk? That's exactly what I said. Full military training, physical conditioning, weapons training, tactical exercises, the complete program. 8 weeks, same as any recruit. Rodriguez's face cycled through several expressions, confusion, disbelief, and finally something approaching horror. Ma'am, with all due respect, that's impossible. Williams isn't military material. He's a desk clerk. He probably can't do 10 push-ups. Maybe not today, General Hayes agreed, turning back to face the sergeant. But that's what training is for, isn't it? To build people up? To help them discover capabilities they didn't know they had? But ma'am, he's a civilian. He hasn't enlisted. He has no obligation to undergo military training. And frankly, it would be a waste of time and resources. General Hayes smiled, but there was steel in it. Oh, but he won't be doing it alone. You see, Sergeant, this is as much about your training as his. I want to see if you can recognize and develop potential in someone who doesn't fit your preconceived notions. Rodriguez felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. What exactly are you proposing, ma'am? Simple. You train Marcus Williams for 8 weeks. If at the end of that time he can pass the basic military fitness test and demonstrate competency in fundamental military skills, you'll have proven that leadership means more than just shouting at people who already want to be soldiers. And if he fails? Rodriguez asked, though he already suspected he wouldn't like the answer. If he fails because you failed to properly train him, Then we'll have a different conversation about your understanding of leadership and your future role in training recruits. The challenge was clear, and Rodriguez realized he was trapped between his certainty that Marcus would fail and his growing understanding that his own career might depend on proving otherwise. "Ma'am, surely you can't be serious about this. The man is a civilian clerk. He chose that job specifically because he didn't want military service. Have you asked him what he wants? Have you ever considered that maybe he stayed civilian because people like you made it clear he wasn't welcome in the military?" Rodriguez had no answer for that. He sat in silence, contemplating the impossible task that had just been laid before him. General Hayes returned to her desk and pulled out a folder. "I've already spoken with the base commander about this. You'll have access to all training facilities and equipment. Marcus will continue his administrative duties in the mornings and train with you in the afternoons and evenings. 8 weeks, Sergeant. Prove to me that you understand what leadership really means." Rodriguez stood up slowly, his mind racing. He thought about Marcus, thin, quiet, seemingly fragile Marcus, and tried to imagine him completing even the first day of military training. It seemed impossible, hopeless, a setup for failure that would embarrass them both. But as he looked at General Hayes's determined expression, Rodriguez realized that this wasn't really about Marcus Williams at all. This was about him, about his prejudices, about his assumption that strength could only look one way. The general was challenging him to become a better leader, and failure wasn't just about Marcus washing out. It was about Rodriguez proving that he was exactly the kind of narrow-minded instructor who held the military back. "When do we start, ma'am?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tomorrow morning. I suggest you think carefully about your approach, Sergeant. This young man's success or failure will reflect directly on your abilities as a leader and trainer." As Rodriguez left the general's office, his mind was already working, trying to figure out how to accomplish the impossible. He had 8 weeks to transform a desk clerk into a soldier, and his own reputation hung in the balance. Marcus was finishing up his morning administrative tasks when Rodriguez appeared in his office doorway. The drill sergeant's expression was unreadable, a mixture of resignation and grim determination that Marcus had never seen before. Gone was the usual smirk of superiority, replaced by something that looked almost like nervous energy. "Williams," Rodriguez said, his voice lacking its usual harsh edge, "I need to speak with you." Marcus looked up from his computer screen, immediately tensing. After yesterday's encounter with General Hayes, he had been wondering if Rodriguez would find new ways to make his life difficult. "Yes, Sergeant. General Hayes has requested that you participate in a special training program." Rodriguez paused, seeming to struggle with the words. Military training. Full program 8 weeks. The words didn't compute at first. Marcus stared at Rodriguez, waiting for the punchline or the cruel twist that would reveal this as another form of humiliation. "I'm sorry, what?" Rodriguez stepped into the office and closed the door behind him. For the first time since Marcus had known him, the sergeant looked uncomfortable, almost vulnerable. "Look, Williams, I'm going to be straight with you. The general thinks I've been too hard on you. She wants me to train you to military standards to prove to prove some point about leadership." Marcus felt his world shift slightly on its axis. "She wants you to train me? But I'm a civilian. I chose to be a civilian." "Yeah, well, apparently the general thinks you might have chosen differently if you'd been given a fair chance." Rodriguez ran his hand through his short hair, a gesture Marcus had never seen from the always composed drill sergeant. "The question is, are you willing to try?" The office fell silent except for the hum of the computer and the distant sounds of base activity. Marcus's mind raced through the implications of what Rodriguez was proposing. 8 weeks of military training with the man who had spent 3 years making his life miserable. It sounded like a recipe for disaster. But underneath his apprehension, Marcus felt something else stirring, a curiosity he hadn't experienced in years. What would it be like to push his body and mind beyond their current limits? What would it feel like to meet challenges head-on instead of hiding behind his desk? What exactly would this training involve? Marcus asked carefully. Rodriguez seemed surprised by the question, as if he had expected an immediate rejection. "Everything. Physical fitness, weapons training, tactical exercises, military protocol. The same program we put recruits through, compressed into 8 weeks instead of the usual 12. And you would be training me personally?" "Yes," Rodriguez's jaw tightened. Every afternoon and evening after your regular work hours. Weekends, too. Marcus studied the drill sergeant's face, looking for signs of the mockery he had grown accustomed to. Instead, he saw something that looked almost like respect, grudging and reluctant, but genuine. "Can I think about it?" Marcus asked. Rodriguez nodded. "You have until tomorrow morning to decide. But Williams, if you say yes, I need to know you're committed. This isn't going to be easy. I'll push you harder than you've ever been pushed in your life." After Rodriguez left, Marcus sat alone in his office, staring at the computer screen without seeing it. The safe, predictable world he had built for himself was suddenly full of possibilities he had never considered. For 3 years, he had accepted Rodriguez's assessment of him as weak, unsuited for anything beyond filing papers and processing forms. But General Hayes had seen something different, something worth defending. That evening, Marcus went home to his small apartment and found himself staring at his reflection in the bathroom mirror. He saw what everyone else saw, a thin, pale young man with soft hands and rounded shoulders from years of hunching over keyboards. But for the first time, he tried to imagine what else might be possible. The next morning, Marcus arrived at Rodriguez's office 15 minutes early. The drill sergeant was already there, reviewing training schedules and looking like he hadn't slept well. "I'll do it," Marcus said simply. Rodriguez looked up, and for a moment his expression was almost relieved. "You sure? Once we start, there's no quitting. The general will be watching, and failure isn't an option for either of us. I'm sure." And so began the most challenging 8 weeks of Marcus Williams' life. That first afternoon, Rodriguez led him to the base gym, a cavernous space filled with weights, exercise equipment, and the sharp smell of sweat and determination. Marcus had never set foot inside a real gym before, and he felt completely out of place among the machines and barbells. "First things first," Rodriguez said, his voice taking on the professional tone Marcus had heard him use with recruits. "We need to establish a baseline. How many push-ups can you do?" Marcus got down on the floor, acutely aware of how awkward he looked. He managed 7 push-ups before his arms gave out, leaving him gasping on the gym floor. Rodriguez made a note on his clipboard without comment. "Sit-ups?" 15 sit-ups later, Marcus was convinced he was going to be sick. His abdominal muscles, which had apparently been dormant for most of his adult life, screamed in protest. "Running?" Rodriguez asked, though he looked like he already knew the answer. They walked to the track that circled the base. Marcus managed half a mile before he had to stop, doubled over and wheezing like a broken engine. Rodriguez watched him with an expression that might have been pity or might have been professional assessment. "Okay," Rodriguez said finally. "Now I know what we're working with." Over the following days, Marcus discovered muscles he never knew he had, mostly because they hurt constantly. Rodriguez designed a training program that was challenging but not impossible, gradually building Marcus's strength and endurance. The drill sergeant's approach was completely different from what Marcus had expected. Instead of shouting and intimidation, Rodriguez became a demanding but patient instructor. "The key," Rodriguez explained during their 3rd training session, "is progressive overload. We increase the challenge gradually so your body can adapt. Push too hard too fast and you'll just get injured. Don't push hard enough and you won't improve." Marcus found himself looking forward to the training sessions despite the physical discomfort. For the first time in his adult life, he was setting goals that had nothing to do with filing systems or data entry. Each day brought small victories, an extra push-up, an additional lap around the track, a slight improvement in his form. But the real transformation was in how Rodriguez treated him. The mockery and condescension were gone, replaced by the focused attention of a professional trainer. Rodriguez still pushed him hard, but it was the kind of pressure that helped Marcus grow, rather than the kind that tore him down. "You're stronger than you think," Rodriguez told him after Marcus completed his first full-mile run. "You just never had anyone show you how to access that strength." As the first week of training ended, Marcus realized that something fundamental had changed in his relationship with Rodriguez. They weren't friends, not yet, but they were no longer adversaries. They had become something more complex, a trainer and student working toward a common goal, with both their reputations on the line. General Hayes stopped by the gym one evening during the 2nd week, watching silently as Marcus struggled through a set of military-style exercises. She said nothing to either man, but Marcus caught her small nod of approval before she left. It was a tiny gesture, but it filled him with a determination he had never felt before. The real test was still 6 weeks away, but Marcus was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, he might surprise everyone, including himself. By the 4th week of training, Marcus was a different person. His shoulders had broadened slightly from the constant push-ups and weight training. His face had lost its pallor, replaced by the healthy flush of someone who spent hours outdoors. Most importantly, he carried himself differently, straighter, more confident, like someone who had discovered capabilities he never knew existed. The transformation hadn't gone unnoticed around the base. Other soldiers had begun stopping by the training areas to watch the unlikely pair work together. Some came out of curiosity, others out of skepticism, but increasingly they came out of respect for what they were witnessing. Rodriguez had proven to be a revelation as an instructor. Away from the pressure to break down cocky recruits, he demonstrated a teaching ability that surprised even himself. He learned to read Marcus's limits perfectly, knowing exactly when to push harder and when to allow recovery. His years of experience with different personality types served him well as he adapted his methods to Marcus's analytical, methodical approach to learning. "You think too much," Rodriguez told Marcus during a particularly challenging weapons training session. "Stop trying to calculate every variable and trust your instincts." Marcus was learning to handle a standard-issue rifle, and his precision with paperwork didn't initially translate to marksmanship. He would line up his shots perfectly according to the manual, but his groupings were scattered across the target. "I'm following the procedure exactly as written," Marcus protested, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "That's your problem right there," Rodriguez replied, stepping behind him to adjust his stance. "You're treating this like filing a report. Shooting is about feel, about becoming one with the weapon. The manual gives you the foundation, but you have to build the instinct on top of it." Rodriguez placed his hands over Marcus's, helping him feel the proper grip and trigger control. "Breathe in, let half out, hold, squeeze gently. Don't think about the target, just focus on the process." The next shot hit dead center. Marcus stared at the target in amazement. "How did that happen?" "You stopped overthinking and started trusting yourself," Rodriguez said with what might have been pride. "Do it again." The next 5 shots all clustered near the center of the target. Marcus felt a rush of excitement unlike anything he had experienced in his administrative work. This was immediate, visceral feedback. Either the bullet hit the target or it didn't. There was no ambiguity, no complex filing systems, just pure cause and effect. Word of Marcus's progress began reaching General Hayes through her informal network of observations. Soldiers who had initially come to watch the desk clerk embarrass himself were now talking about his dedication and rapid improvement. Rodriguez's reputation was also evolving. Instead of being seen as a hard-headed drill instructor, he was gaining recognition as a trainer who could develop potential in anyone. The breakthrough came during the 5th week, during a particularly grueling physical fitness test. Marcus had been steadily improving in all areas, but the complete test, push-ups, sit-ups, 2-mile run, and obstacle course, remained a daunting challenge. Rodriguez stood with his stopwatch and clipboard as Marcus positioned himself for the push-up portion. The required number for passing was 42 in 2 minutes. 5 weeks earlier, Marcus could barely manage 7. "Ready?" Rodriguez asked, his voice neutral but his eyes showing the tension he felt. Marcus nodded and dropped into position. The first 20 push-ups came easily. His arms had developed real strength over the weeks of training. At 30, he began to feel the familiar burn, but he pushed through. At 40, his form was still good, his breathing controlled. 42, Rodriguez called out. "Time!" Marcus collapsed onto his stomach, breathing hard but grinning. He had done it. He had actually passed the push-up requirement. The sit-ups went even better. The 2-mile run, which had once seemed impossible, was completed in just under the required time. Marcus felt like he was flying as he crossed the finish line, his legs strong beneath him, his lungs working efficiently, but the obstacle course remained. It was a complex series of challenges: rope climbing, wall scaling, crawling under barriers, navigating balance beams. It required not just strength and endurance, but coordination, agility, and mental toughness. Marcus approached the first obstacle, an 8-foot wall that had to be scaled without assistance. 5 weeks ago, he couldn't have imagined getting over such a barrier. Now he ran at it with confidence, planted his foot against the wooden surface and pulled himself up and over in one fluid motion. The rope climb came next. Marcus had struggled with this particular challenge for weeks, his hand slipping on the rough fiber despite Rodriguez's patient instruction on proper technique. But today, something was different. His grip felt secure, his technique smooth, and he reached the top faster than he ever had before. Rodriguez watched with growing amazement as Marcus navigated each obstacle with increasing confidence. The analytical mind that had once seemed like a liability was now an asset. Marcus had studied each challenge methodically, breaking down the movements into components he could master and perfect. The crawl under the barbed wire barrier required him to stay low and move efficiently through mud and obstacles. Marcus's smaller frame, once a source of embarrassment, proved advantageous here. He moved like water through the course, emerging on the other side barely winded. The balance beam had always been his nemesis, a narrow wooden plank suspended 3 feet off the ground that had to be crossed without falling. Marcus had fallen off it dozens of times during practice, his natural caution making him move too slowly and lose momentum. But today he stepped onto the beam with purpose and walked across it like he was strolling down a sidewalk. The final obstacle was a rope traverse across a water pit. Marcus grabbed the rope, wrapped his legs around it properly, and began moving hand over hand across the gap. Halfway across, disaster struck. The rope, worn from countless training sessions, suddenly snapped. Marcus plummeted into the muddy water below with a splash that echoed across the training area. For a moment, he disappeared completely beneath the surface. Rodriguez's heart stopped as he waited for Marcus to emerge. When Marcus finally surfaced, he was covered in mud, his uniform soaked, and his face showed the crushing disappointment of being so close to success, only to have it snatched away by equipment failure. He stood in the waist-deep water, looking up at Rodriguez with eyes that held all the frustration of 5 weeks of hard work seemingly wasted. Equipment malfunction. Rodriguez called out immediately. That doesn't count against you. We'll run it again tomorrow with a new rope. But Marcus shook his head as he climbed out of the pit. No, Sergeant. I should have tested the rope first. In a real situation, equipment failure could get people killed. I need to learn to check everything, to be prepared for anything. Rodriguez stared at him, genuinely impressed by the response. A few months ago, Marcus would have made excuses, blamed external factors, or simply given up. Now he was taking responsibility and thinking like a soldier. You're right, Rodriguez said quietly, but you also completed every other obstacle perfectly. The improvement is remarkable. Word of the day's event spread quickly through the base. Marcus's near success and his mature response to the setback earned him respect from soldiers who had previously dismissed him as just another soft civilian. More importantly, it demonstrated to Rodriguez that his training methods were working. That evening, as they reviewed the day's performance, Rodriguez found himself seeing Marcus in an entirely new light. The transformation wasn't just physical. Marcus had developed the mental toughness and personal responsibility that defined a good soldier. You know, Rodriguez said as they cleaned up the training equipment, when the general first proposed this challenge, I thought she was setting us both up for failure. Marcus looked up from wiping down the weights they had used for strength training. And now? Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. Now I'm starting to think she knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't just challenging me to train you. She was challenging me to become a better leader. The admission hung in the air between them. For the first time, Rodriguez was acknowledging that this experience had changed him as much as it had changed Marcus. 3 weeks left, Marcus said, rolling up the training mats they had used for stretching. 3 weeks, Rodriguez agreed. Think you're ready for the real test? Marcus considered the question seriously. The equipment failure had been disappointing, but it had also shown him how far he had come. 5 weeks ago, a setback like that would have crushed his confidence completely. Now it just made him more determined to succeed. Ask me again in 3 weeks, Marcus said with a smile that would have been impossible to imagine when this journey began. As they walked back toward the main base buildings, Rodriguez realized that regardless of how the final test went, both of them had already won something more valuable than any official recognition. They had discovered that strength, leadership, and potential could be found in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the most important victories were the ones that happened inside a person's mind and heart. The final week arrived with an atmosphere of anticipation that seemed to permeate the entire base. Word had spread about the unusual challenge General Hayes had issued, and soldiers from different units found reasons to be near the training areas. Marcus had become something of a legend, the civilian clerk, who was attempting to prove that military potential could be found in the most unlikely places. Rodriguez felt the weight of expectation more acutely than Marcus did. His reputation as a trainer, his understanding of leadership, and his relationship with General Hayes all hung in the balance. But more than that, he had developed a genuine respect for Marcus that surprised him. The young man had exceeded every expectation, not just in physical development but in mental toughness and character. The final test was scheduled for Friday morning. General Hayes would personally oversee the evaluation, along with the base commander and several other senior officers. Marcus would have to complete the full military fitness assessment, the same test given to new recruits at the end of basic training. On Tuesday of that final week, Marcus was going through his morning administrative duties when he received an unexpected visitor. Captain Sarah Mitchell from the base personnel office knocked on his doorframe, holding a manila folder. "Marcus, do you have a minute?" Marcus looked up from his computer, recognizing Captain Mitchell but rarely having reason to interact with her directly. "Of course, Captain. What can I do for you?" Captain Mitchell closed the door and sat down across from his desk. "I've been following your training program with Sergeant Rodriguez. It's been quite impressive." "Thank you, ma'am. It's been challenging but rewarding." "I'm sure it has. That's actually why I'm here." Captain Mitchell opened her folder and pulled out several official-looking documents. "I wanted to discuss some options with you." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "Options? If you pass Friday's test, and from everything I've heard you will, you'll have demonstrated that you possess the basic qualifications for military service. Have you considered actually enlisting?" The question caught Marcus completely off guard. For 8 weeks he had been focused solely on meeting the challenge General Hayes had set. He hadn't thought beyond proving that Rodriguez could successfully train him. I haven't really considered it," Marcus admitted. Captain Mitchell smiled. "Well, maybe you should. Your administrative skills are exceptional, and you're clearly capable of handling military training. We have several programs that would be perfect for someone with your background. Military intelligence, logistics, communications. You could maintain your analytical strengths while adding military skills and leadership training." She slid a brochure across his desk. "Think about it. You don't have to decide immediately, but the opportunity is there if you want it." After Captain Mitchell left, Marcus sat staring at the enlistment materials. 8 weeks ago, the idea of joining the military would have been laughable. Now it felt like a natural next step in a journey he hadn't even known he was taking. That afternoon's training session was different from the others. Rodriguez seemed more relaxed, confident that Marcus was ready for the test. They ran through each component one more time: push-ups, sit-ups, the 2-mile run, and the obstacle course with its newly repaired rope traverse. Marcus performed flawlessly. His 47 push-ups exceeded the requirement by 5. His sit-ups were completed with time to spare. The 2-mile run was his fastest yet. The obstacle course, which had once seemed impossible, was now just another challenge to be methodically conquered. As they finished the session, Rodriguez pulled Marcus aside. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice unusually quiet. Marcus was surprised. "For what?" "For 3 years of treating you like you were less than capable. For assuming I knew what you could accomplish without ever giving you a chance to show what you could do." Marcus considered this. The old hurt from those years of mockery was still there, but it felt distant now, like pain from a wound that had healed. "You were doing your job as you understood it." "No," Rodriguez said firmly. "I was being a bad leader. A good leader sees potential and develops it. A bad leader only sees what fits his preconceptions." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sun set over the training grounds. "Whatever happens Friday," Rodriguez continued, "you should know that training you has made me a better sergeant." General Hayes knew what she was doing when she issued this challenge. Friday morning arrived with crisp autumn air and clear skies. Marcus arrived at the testing area to find a small crowd of observers: General Hayes, the base commander, several other officers, and about 30 enlisted personnel who had followed his journey. Marcus felt surprisingly calm as he warmed up. 8 weeks of preparation had given him confidence in his abilities, and he had learned to trust the process Rodriguez had taught him. He wasn't the same person who had struggled through 7 push-ups on that first day. General Hayes approached him before the test began.
"How are you feeling, Marcus?"
"Ready, ma'am." "Nervous but ready," she nodded approvingly. "Nervous is good. It means you understand the importance of what you're doing. But remember, you've already succeeded in the most important way. You've proven to yourself what you're capable of." The test began with push-ups. Marcus dropped into position and completed 52 perfect repetitions, his form remaining strong throughout. The crowd murmured appreciatively. He had exceeded the requirement by 10. Sit-ups came next. Marcus knocked out 65, again well above the minimum standard. His core strength, developed through weeks of dedicated training, served him perfectly. The 2-mile run was where Marcus had worried he might struggle. Running had never come naturally to him, and the distance still seemed daunting despite his training. But as he settled into his pace, Rodriguez running alongside calling out encouragement, Marcus found his rhythm. "Steady breathing," Rodriguez called out. "You've got this. Trust your training." Marcus crossed the finish line in 15 minutes and 32 seconds, 28 seconds under the required time. He was breathing hard but felt strong, ready for the final challenge. The obstacle course awaited. The same course that had defeated him so many times in training, where equipment failure had denied him success just 3 weeks earlier. Now, a new rope hung across the water pit, and Marcus approached the first obstacle with quiet determination. He moved through the course like he had been doing it for years. The wall was scaled smoothly, the rope climb completed efficiently, the low crawl executed with precision. The balance beam, once his nemesis, was crossed without hesitation. At the rope traverse, Marcus paused for just a moment to test the rope's security. The lesson from the equipment failure had been well learned. Satisfied that it would hold, he began his hand-over-hand journey across the pit. This time there were no surprises. Marcus reached the other side and dropped safely to solid ground. He had done it. He had completed every element of the military fitness test successfully. The crowd erupted in applause. Rodriguez was grinning widely, his pride obvious to everyone present. General Hayes stepped forward with a stopwatch and clipboard. "Congratulations, Marcus. You have successfully completed the basic military fitness assessment, with scores that exceed minimum standards in every category." She turned to Rodriguez. "And congratulations to you, Sergeant. You have demonstrated exceptional leadership and training ability. This young man's success is a direct reflection of your skill as an instructor." Rodriguez snapped to attention. "Thank you, ma'am. Training Marcus has been an honor and a learning experience." General Hayes addressed the crowd. "What we've witnessed here is more than just one person meeting a physical challenge. We've seen what happens when a leader looks beyond surface appearances to recognize potential. We've seen what happens when someone is given a fair chance to prove what they can accomplish." She turned back to Marcus. "The question now is, what do you want to do with these newly discovered capabilities?" Marcus looked around at the faces surrounding him. Rodriguez, who had become an unlikely mentor. General Hayes, who had seen something in him worth defending. The soldiers who had watched his journey with growing respect. Then he thought about Captain Mitchell's visit, the enlistment papers on his desk, and the future that had suddenly opened up before him. "I'd like to serve, ma'am," Marcus said clearly. "I'd like to enlist." The applause that followed was thunderous. Rodriguez stepped forward and, for the first time, offered Marcus his hand, not as a sergeant to a civilian clerk, but as one soldier to another. As they shook hands, Rodriguez said quietly, "Welcome to the real army, soldier." Marcus smiled, knowing that his journey was just beginning, but confident now that he could handle whatever challenges lay ahead. He had learned the most important lesson of all, that strength, courage, and capability weren't defined by how someone looked or where they started, but by their willingness to grow, to be challenged, and to never stop discovering what they might become. General Hayes watched the scene with satisfaction. Another good leader had been developed. Another soldier had found his calling, and the military was stronger for both transformations. Sometimes, she reflected, the best victories were the ones that proved everyone could be more than they imagined possible.